It took me a long time, but I finally managed to finish this script, so without any further delay, let's jump into the lovely mess that is Mulan 2020. If you can see the mess in the background, kindly ignore it. So all Disney's previous remakes have been no less than disastrous. Their decision to take all their old classics and recreate them essentially shot for shot using soul-sucking CGI has made people less than happy. And then Mulan was announced. This $200 million movie, filmed entirely in China in an effort to attain realism, was said to be Disney's most expensive film ever. Now, while I know that a lot of what was portrayed in this film isn't culturally accurate, I still enjoyed the world I was presented with. But naturally, the ultimate question is whether or not the story held up. People were pretty put off when they learned that Disney planned to make massive changes to the original story. We were told there'd be no Mushu, no Cricket, no Li Shang, and no Huns. On the one hand, it was good to hear that Disney was finally trying something new, but on the other hand, it seemed like they were removing everything that had made the original movie fun. However, after viewing the trailer, it became pretty clear to me that the remake had no intention of trying to be the original. And after taking that into account, I was actually decently impressed with what I saw. And then I watched the movie. Right off the bat, the audience was made aware of the impressive ability that Mulan possessed, with viewers consequently rushing to slap the Mary Sue label on her. I even heard a few people paint her as a chosen one archetype, which deeply confused me since the film made it abundantly clear that Mulan's abilities were not exclusive to her. But getting back to the movie, I was pleased to see Disney taking its time to let the emotional scenes sink in, rather than rushing through it as they did in previous remakes. The characters were quick to grow on me. In fact, I found very little difference between this version of Mulan and the original. They were both very humble, very dedicated to their family and their comrades, and both equally noble-hearted. Mulan's sister was a passable addition due to the fact that her role in the story was minimal, and her most defining trait was her fear of spiders, which isn't entirely unrelatable. Oh my god! Mulan's father was more or less the same. The admirable paternal figure, always expressing a fierce pride in his daughters despite their supposed shortcomings. And Mulan's new love interest was also much the same. The honorable comrade pushing Mulan to be better. Really, the only difference between him and Li is that Li was Mulan's superior. And speaking of superiors, I loved Mulan's new commander. His introduction was badass, and like Chen, he was always pushing Mulan to do better. Cricket, Yao, Ling, and the others unfortunately didn't get as much attention, and given that their animated counterparts were literal caricatures, they had absolutely no hope of standing out as much as the originals. Even so, Cricket, who I feel got the most characterization out of the bunch, managed to wring some feels out of me. His gentle nature and his moment of badassery at the end of the movie caused the character to grow on me. And when they pulled his fake-out death, I won't lie, it actually got me. As for the villains, I don't have much to say about Bori Khan, but I liked how the witch was essentially Mulan's mirror opposite. From the beginning, it was obvious that she would eventually turn good due to her resentment of her servitude to Bori Khan and her desire to be accepted. In regards to the Emperor, I honestly loved how chill he was, and how he stood apart from everyone else in that he didn't even blink at the fact that Mulan was a woman, and took no time at all in treating her with the respect she deserved. As for the Phoenix, it was obvious that it was meant to be a more mystical element of the story, kind of like the spirits in Avatar: The Last Airbender. But again, getting back to the story, it mostly follows the course of the 1998 version. Mulan's meeting with the matchmaker goes poorly, her father is called off to war, and she chooses to take his place in the Imperial Army. I'd agree with the general consensus that the scene where Mulan takes her father's armor and rides off in the middle of the night was far less impactful than in the original. The scene cuts immediately from Mulan contemplatively holding her father's sword to her wearing her father's armor and heading out the door. I definitely found it a bit jarring, but the theme of the three virtues that it sets up was well done. The battle with Bori Khan's army is where things get a little stupid. Mulan and a small group chase after Khan's Shadow Riders, and for some reason Mulan is the only one who fires back when her companions could easily do the same. They wouldn't even have to turn in the saddle like these show-offs are doing. After that, Mulan has her encounter with the witch and finally decides to come clean and stop holding back. The only thing that bugs me here is that she takes off her armor. I mean, you could explain it away by saying she did it for mobility reasons, but letting your hair down and removing the stuff that protects you just seems like a very poor decision given the circumstances. And then Mulan somehow teleports behind enemy lines, and I've got nothing. Seriously, how stupid do you have to be to turn a whole catapult to fire at a small band of archers who happen to be right in front of an avalanche waiting to happen? You couldn't have just sent a small band of men up there to deal with it? Also, Mulan is extremely lucky that these guys way overshot their target. Anyway, I have a lot to say about the next scene. In comparison to the 1998 film, I actually like what the 2020 version did a lot better in this instance. I'm referring to how Mulan makes the choice to come clean as opposed to in the 1998 version where she is involuntarily outed. The 2020 version has given power to Mulan in this moment. She is deciding for herself. I also appreciate that she already tried in the past to reveal her true nature. She wants to be truthful. She wants to live up to the standard that has been set for her through the three virtues. And honestly, Li Shang's excuse for not killing her in the 1998 version makes no sense. He says a life for a life, but it wasn't just his life that Mulan saved. It was all their lives. And they knew it too. There was no excuse aside from their pathetically clinging to old traditions. But in the 2020 version, the men didn't know what Mulan had done for them, so their reaction makes so much more sense. Moving on to Mulan's conversation with the witch, something I found interesting was how a certain piece of dialogue evolves over the course of the film. That dialogue being when Mulan's father tells her to learn her place. In that instance, it's something that's being used to put her down. But over the course of the film, she takes it and makes it her own.
I know my place. And it is my duty to fight for the kingdom and protect the emperor.
By the end of the movie, when the witch tells her to take her place, it's a recognition of what Mulan has decided for herself and what she's truly capable of. And speaking of the finale, let's talk about that. Namely, the witch's death scene. Yes, she could have easily killed Bori Khan instead of taking the arrow for Mulan, but quite frankly, I think she wanted to die. She realized she could never be accepted like she wanted, and it was enough for her that those unattained dreams be achieved through Mulan. And before I conclude this video, I just want to say that I'm still shocked at the level of vitriol this movie received upon its release. Yeah, it's far from perfect. Aside from the problems I already mentioned, and despite the fact that I love seeing Mulan's comrades speak in her defense, the scene where Mulan's commander goes from threatening execution to giving her command is admittedly a pretty drastic change and highly unwarranted. And the climax and ending scene of the movie seem to almost bend over backwards to have praise heaped on the titular character. But the accusations I have seen most frequently leveled against this film just don't make sense to me. For example, the claim that it's the exact opposite of empowering is just so baffling. The message to be your authentic self will always be empowering. And as for the unavoidable debate on whether or not she's a Mary Sue, allow me to clarify why I think this title doesn't suit her. If you've seen Emmy's video on what defines a Mary Sue, at the end of the video she asks some vital questions on how to determine whether or not a character really deserves to be labeled a Mary Sue or Gary Stu. These questions, viewed in light of any damning traits that may be present within a character, ask whether or not those traits are sufficiently explained, make sense within the story, and serve the story as a whole rather than just the character. Now, when it comes to Mulan in the 2020 remake, my answer to these questions would be: 1. Mulan's abilities were adequately explained within the film. 2. They made sense within the story, especially when viewed in light of the abilities of others harnessing the same power. In fact, Mulan's abilities were quite frankly dwarfed in comparison to that of the witch or the emperor. And 3. Yes, Mulan's abilities do serve the story as a whole, since if you were to remove them, you'd lose the core conflict of the story, and the witch would be entirely robbed of her purpose and significance in the story. And even if I were to look beyond Mulan's skill set and levy these questions against other damning traits, such as how the in-world logic of the story seems to bend to her will at times, blinding and stupidifying her foes so that she can easily circumvent them and use them to enact her plan, giving her commander a miraculous change of heart so that she can rise to a leadership role, or having characters go out of their way to praise her almost to excess, well, yes, these inexplicable moments do unfortunately weaken Mulan's character. If at the end of the day all I can point to are these scarce instances across a 2-hour film, then no, I don't think that's enough to make her a Mary Sue. Ultimately, while I definitely wouldn't rank it as high as the original Mulan, I still enjoy and appreciate the remake for what it was, and find many of the complaints to be misguided and undeserved. Besides, if not for the remake, we would never have been able to enjoy this stunning rendition of my reflection. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, be sure to drop a like and leave a comment down below. Also, remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. And if you're looking for more ways to show your support, consider becoming a patron, link in the description. Of course, massive thanks to those of you who are already a patron. Don't forget to stay loud and proud, folks. I'm your alibi, and I will see you next time. I was saying off camera, Mulan doesn't have a very deep story. There's not much to say outside of, well, a lot of what's been picked up on already, so it's very obvious. So yeah, outside the obvious, there's just not much to say aside from the subjective. But yeah, that was a tangent. I'm gonna move on with my life.